As executives, you need to do three things. You need to get the right people in the right seats. You need to set sort of an inspiring sort of vision and strategy for the company. And then you need to drive an operating cadence to get the organization there. So I think many leaders fail to both appreciate those three things and focus appropriately on all three of those things. Oftentimes, people will bias their activity to one of those things because that's what they're personally good at or they care the most about. But I believe, being a CEO requires you to focus on all three of those things. You have to focus on them at the right times and in the right context.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Your people are one of the most important aspects to the growth of your company. Don't take my word for it. You can talk to a lot of founders and CEOs across companies, and they will tell you the only way they were able to scale is because they had the right people in the right seats. They developed those people, and they were able to create a culture that unites everyone together. Today, we look at high growth cultures. We have a special guest with us. He is Brett Galloway, the founder, CEO of AttackIQ. They're a cybersecurity company. He dives into some of the details of what they do, but the real important aspect of today's conversation is what really makes up a culture? What is it? He answers that question, but he also talks about how they got to this place. What do they really include into it? How they got to their values, how they use their values, and all of the things necessary for you to lead a company with a high growth culture. My job is to help you become the best leader you can be. I love what I'm doing. I love having conversations with people who are not getting what they want out of their leadership, out of their people, out of their growth, and help them identify exactly what that is. I want to make that offer to you. If you are listening in this conversation and there's something that you want but you don't have, I want to help you get clear about what it is, what's getting in your way, and I do this all for free. I love to be able to be of service to my audience. Take me up on this offer. Just go to genehammett.com, go to schedule your call, and I'd love to talk to you about your business, about how you could grow and how you could be the leader that your team deserves. Just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call. Now here is Brett.
Brett, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic.
You've been on my mind lately talking about some of the things you've been through, but before we dive into our topic of culture of fast growth companies, tell us about AttackIQ.
Be happy to. So AttackIQ is a venture-backed cybersecurity startup. We're in the increasingly hot space of breach and attack simulation. Gartner named this one of the top security and risk trends for the year, which is a very august company in a very crowded market space for cybersecurity software. The problem we solve is very simple. Most enterprise breaches today occur because the existing security program fails. Enterprises have built security control architectures and programs, but those security controls they've deployed fail to operate. And so our job is to make sure that the security programs that enterprises have built work.
Love that. Brett, you've had a lot of experience you bring with you to this point. I know you're taking a company of growth and you're probably taking all that together. My job is to help us uncover for the audience, what does it take to create a fast growth company? One of the things that we've seen that you do really well and you focus on is culture. So why is culture so important?
Well, culture is actually pretty simple. Culture is norms of behavior, how people behave. Every company has a culture, right? So the question is whether those norms of behavior are constructive or destructive. Many companies will have sort of culture statements and the executives say things. The reality is culture is not what the executives say, it's what people do. Now, so the leader's job then is not to say what they want the culture to be, but it's to shape those norms of behavior.
When you think about culture statements and things like that, I'm sure that there's some good ones out there. There are probably some that are pretty weak, can't hold a drop of water. But what do you think about having a culture statement?
Well, we do have a culture statement. And what's fascinating is how we went about doing it. We actually interviewed our employees. We did this in about a year and a half ago. And we asked them what they valued about AttackIQ. And we got the answers and we wrote them down. And there were 6. They valued one team, impress every customer, do the right thing, innovation, operate with transparency, and people first. What we then did with that information is we then went back to the employees and said, this is what you said you value about AttackIQ. Let's work together to make this more and more true of how we operate and how we behave.
Is that different than your core values, or is that wrapped all together?
It's the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually describe them as our values. But obviously what these really are descriptions of norms of behavior. And when I introduced this, I was actually very explicit. I said, these are the values that you all value. That doesn't mean mean we always do these. It doesn't even mean that I always do these. And so, part of Operate with Transparency was, finding ways for each of us to hold each other accountable.
Now, hold on. Brett just talked about a survey on values to be able to create this culture statement. Well, this is one of the principles of fast growth companies. They don't just sit back and do things themselves. They want to include others. And in fact, something like values is something to really stretch yourself and include others around you. Maybe not even your executive leadership team. Go beyond that, beyond the directors, beyond the managers, all the way to the front line, because all of those people are shaping the culture. And you want to make sure you tune into what they're saying, because when they have a feeling of being heard inside this process, they were more likely to feel ownership around the values. Maybe even some of the words they select get used. And that feeling translates into how they show up for work, how they treat the customers, and how they drive value for the organization. Include people when you can. And this is beyond just the survey on values. It's in everything you can do. If you can include more people, they would take more ownership of that process and of the results they get. Include people. That's what fast growth companies do. Back to Brett. One of them that you said was people first. What do you mean by that?
Well, we structured our values to bookend our list with people. So we started with one team, right? And then we ended with people first. And what we mean by people first is really a few things. One is empowering people to work in an environment that's conducive to creating an optimal work-life balance. It's also an explicit way for us to communicate that we're really all dependent on one another, and that dependence means we help each other, and it means that we operate in ways that sort of tie back to the first value, which is one team.
Now, a lot of people take offense to the people first stuff inside of values of a company. And really, when I talk about it from a leadership perspective, because they think that customers should be first. But I think there's a distinction that they're missing. And I don't want to lead you too much. Why wouldn't you put your customer values as customer?
Well, by the way, people first isn't just our employees.
Okay, true.
Right. In fact, one of the most important things in technology sales is to realize that, particularly as a startup, you're certainly selling your product, your software, but to a great extent, what you're selling is the team behind that software. And that, and customers know that, right? They know that the product they're buying today, is actually less than the product they're going to have tomorrow and next week and next month and next year. And they're counting on a partnership with their vendors to continue to deliver value and deliver capabilities. And so what does that mean? Well, that means for us as a vendor, one of the most important things for us to do is make sure that our customers get value, not just professionally, but personally out of their interactions with AttackIQ, right? Many of our customers, are actually building, significant part of their professional reputation on a bet with us as a vendor. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure that bet pays off in spades.
I ask a lot of people this, what I call the impossible question. I never know what's going to happen, because you really could just depend on your perspective. Maybe it's even your day of the week. But the impossible question kind of looks like this. As the leader of a fast growth company, what's more important, customers or employees?
Well, there's an obvious cop-out, which you can't have a company without both of them. The obvious answer is customers, just an external level, right? Yep. The nature of a business is you have customers. And certainly, we talk about values, that's how we operate as individuals and as people, but we do that in service of customer value. The worst companies are companies that are arrogant. The best companies are companies that actually use the fact that they're focusing on delivering customer value to pull people together, right? Get past political barriers, get past organizational barriers, get past sort of personal interest in service of team interest, in service of the customer.
The research that I have, because I do a lot of these interviews with the Inc. 5000, which you're aware of, most of the time when I ask that question, 94% say it's employees. There's a little bit of an issue inside the question. And if you didn't pick up on the nuance of it, it's my fault for probably not pointing it out, but I also don't want to lead people. As a leader, what's more important? And I feel like leaders should be putting employees first, so that the company and those employees can put the customer first. But
I understand.
Is that different than you think?
Yeah, that actually would not change my answer, right? And part of it has to do with sort of difference of means and ends, right? The end that we're delivering is delivering value to our customers. That purpose is what actually gives meaning to our operating together, right? That the extreme difference in a business and a social club. We're not a social club, right? And so obviously part of it comes back to what you mean by important. And clearly, there's lots of research that companies with company's operational effectiveness is completely dominated by how well their team works together. Which is true and clear.
I want to go back to the whole conversation on culture. You've talked about the culture statement. You were able to survey them, get to the values. What else would we see inside your culture that we could learn from?
Well, one of the lessons that back up. So, most of the tricks in my tool belt are things that I've observed and copied from people I worked for, people I worked with, and people that worked for me. And one example of that is I worked at Cisco for 6.5 years. I'd sold my company Aerospace to Cisco. The CEO was John Chambers, a very storied CEO. And one of the things that I observed John do that was incredibly powerful was consistent messaging about vision and mission. And he just said it over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm by training an engineer. So my default mode is if I've told you once, I assume you're not an idiot, so you must remember it. That turns out not to be true. So when I came into AttackIQ, I came in with two things. I came in one with a very firm conviction our mission was really important. Cybersecurity matters deeply. In the last year, we've seen, several very, very noteworthy, cybersecurity breaches. Most recently, the Colonial Pipeline hack that was probably the first cybersecurity breach that actually affected lots of real people. And it's a case where the adversaries, it was just a simple stick-up job. They didn't even mean to disrupt deliveries, and they did. Imagine what would happen if an adversary really meant to cause harm. If you combine that with what I started, which is most breaches are due to security program failures, security control failures, this is a problem. We as individuals in society are dependent on a large number of platforms that are increasingly vulnerable to cyber attack. We've been lucky so far. I believe what we're doing at AttackIQ is the missing ingredient to make sure that the enormous investments that the industry is making in security technology and security programs can work. So that's why I came to the company. That's the one thing I brought. The other thing I brought was this observation about the power of John's communication strategy. So my very first day at the company, I talked about the mission of the company. This, and I did three things: mission, and then I talked about our priorities, and I talked about, my desire for feedback from people, right? Operating with transparency. I started that story on the very first day, and I keep talking about that all the time. And having a powerful purpose clearly and consistently messaged is my single biggest tool for attracting people, retaining people, employees, even customers and partners. And this is a huge learning for me, is just the power of that as a communication tool and as a leadership tool.
Now, Brett just talked about something I want to put a spotlight on for a second. He said the feeling that when you repeat yourself, that sometimes you have this kind of inner voice that says, I've told you once, can't we just move on? Well, here's the reality. You've got to be able to share a consistent message and repeat it over time, because that's what it takes for people to understand it and know the importance of it. Yes, they may roll their eyes sometimes, but the idea is for you to bring such passion and such clarity to it. Every time you talk about the mission and the vision, the priorities, the strategies that we do, the real things are most important to you. Now, we unpack that inside this episode a little bit later, but I wanted to make sure that you understood that sometimes when that inner voice says, I've already told them, maybe I don't need to tell them again. I'm here to tell you, tell them again. And then tell them again and tell them again. You might say different words, you might wrap it in different stories, but you want to get the same message across. And you want to make sure you do it consistently, repeatably, and keep doing it until everyone gets it and they're all aligned together. That's the way you lead a company. Back to Brett. You've been a part of many companies that have grown fast. This is another one that you get to take to the next level. And you've learned a lot about leadership. Where do you think people aren't getting it right? They just don't have an awareness or a blind spot to leadership in today's world.
That's a good question. I tend to think that as executives, you need to do three things. You need to get the right people in the right seats. You need to set sort of an inspiring sort of vision and strategy for the company. And then you need to drive an operating cadence to get the organization there. So I think many leaders fail to both appreciate those three things and focus appropriately on all three of those things. Oftentimes, people will bias their activity to one of those things because that's what they're personally good at or they care the most about. But I believe, being a CEO requires you to focus on all three of those things. You have to focus on them at the right times and in the right context.
I take notes over here. I want to make sure we didn't miss anything. Give this to us again. I got right people, right seats, operational cadence.
Number one. Number two is sort of vision, inspiring vision and strategy for the company, where we're headed. And then three is sort of an effective operating cadence for the company so you actually get there, which is where you put sort of processes and org structure and so on. Does that make sense?
Yep. And I can make the assumption under the first one, right people, right seat. That would be the development of people. That would be any kind of coaching that you have to do to align people together. Is that fair to say?
Well, yeah, it includes hiring.
Yep.
In a high growth company, you're usually hiring a lot. So the quality of your hiring is super important. It's also letting people go when they're not fitting. And then obviously, most importantly, is continuing to provide guidance and feedback and coaching to people so they can be maximally effective, not just in isolation, but in the team.
As we record this, there's a lot of kind of discussion about the great resignation, right? People are going to be not happy with where they are. If they have to go back to work, they're really happy with flexibility. There's a lot of kind of factors in this. Culture, I think, is one of the driving forces that will keep people, even if they're a little bit curious about what else is out there. I have this kind of theory inside of great culture, but you don't want to risk it to maybe get to a place where you're going to be micromanaged and you just don't have the freedom and transparency.
Yep.
What are you guys doing to be proactive around this great resignation?
Well, to begin with, we made the transition from sort of traditional working to remote working, all remote working, very seamlessly. We already had a lot of remote employees. We had multiple offices. And, my personal view about this is actually informed by my experience at Cisco. So Cisco famously introduced telepresence, which was probably the first real business class video conferencing experience. And it was freaking amazing how well it worked and how much time it could save compared to traditional business travel and so on. And so, I was at Cisco, we were at Cisco, it's a power of networks. And I'm thinking this is like going to take over the world. And, all of us getting in a car and driving to an office each day as knowledge workers is just silly. And it didn't change the world. So, COVID has been terrible, but I actually believe one of the silver linings of COVID has been showing people a better way. I think the best way to work is everyone all together in one room. I think the worst way to work is some people in one room and some people remote on the phone.
Yeah.
So if you can't get everyone in the same room, I actually think you're better off operating in a distributed fashion. So we are purely distributed and are going to stay that way.
Give us a little bit more depth around how do you keep a culture in a distributed environment? Like some of the tactical things that you guys are doing that you feel like are making an impact.
It's a great question. So, I said earlier we had 4 priorities. We had mission, customer acquisition, customer success, and family. The first 3 are, all of these sort of relate to why we're here. So the first 3 relate to all of us coming together as a team to achieve our business objectives. The last one reflects the fact that each of us comes to a company with our own personal, financial and professional objectives for ourselves and our families. So we call that out as a priority and we recognize that. And in the last year and a half, we've talked a lot about that. We've talked about, how do you sort of navigate sort of work and life when there's not a clear dividing line between them. We typically in startups, you'll do like a summer barbecue or event for all the employees and get the families together. We couldn't do that. So we did instead is we gave everyone an extra day off and said, take pictures and share them. So we'll have a vicarious distributed virtual, summer event, which was great fun. And we spent a lot of time. I have a bi-weekly all hands, and the topics there are actually half split between kind of business topics and sort of fun topics, right? We run sort of events. We recently gave everyone a stipend to upgrade their remote office environment, but again, they had to take pictures and they just share them on our all hands call. So what we're trying to do is create sort of a personal experience, even though you're not standing next to each other in the water cooler. And then obviously, as restrictions have sort of eased, and obviously they're getting stronger again, we've created opportunities for the teams to get together.
I want to give you one more question here. I don't know what we might have missed inside this idea of culture. We've talked about a lot of things from the values, to how you're actually doing it through the special things through the distributed workforce. What else is missing that we need to cover today? Well,
coming back to the 3 things I said, there's a famous video of Simon Sinek, Start With Why, on YouTube, which if your readers haven't seen, I would encourage you. It's actually a very powerful statement about the power of why in a marketing context. I'm going to use the same construct, but not applied to marketing, applied to leadership. As a leader, you can operate at 3 levels, sort of why, what, and how. And my consistent experience as a leader, not just as a CEO, but even when I ran engineering teams, et cetera, was the most important thing to focus on was why. Because if you get the why right, then good people will pick the right what, and good people will then figure out the right how. My very, very first assignment as a manager, I delivered a successful software project. That's the good news. The bad news, I micromanaged 2 people working for me, and I damn near killed myself, and I swear I'd never do that again. So, my focus as a leader has been continually to try to empower people, and the best way to empower them is with shared purpose. That's why, John Chambers' technique around sort of mission and vision communication is so important. So I spend a great deal of my time educating people on why we're here, and not just at the level of the mission, but more specifically, connecting the dots for people between what they're doing and responsible for and what we're trying to get done overall.
Love it. Brett, you've shared with us a lot of insights around the way you think about leadership and culture. Appreciate you being here.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Fantastic interview. Brett just wrapped up with a lot of the insight around what does it take to create a high growth culture. We talk about some of the details along all the interviews on the show, but hopefully you got a lot out of his insights today. What I take away from it is specifically, you must repeat yourself. That inner voice that comes in, and I know I said this before, but I'm repeating myself again to show you what it means, is you want to make sure that you are repeating yourself consistently. You want to make sure that the message is clear and that people get buy-in to it. Your job as a leader is not to say the words, but to make sure people are committed to it, have a sense of urgency to it, are bought in, committed, feel a sense of ownership around the message. And these things you have to drive. Now, if you are wondering what your next step is or your blind spot inside leadership, my job is to help you figure that out. I've been doing this for 10 years. And if you are the founder or CEO of a company and you want to figure out what your next step is, where do you focus? Where do you spend your time? What's the most important thing? I hear all of these things and I want to help you do that. I have a way for you to schedule time with me. Just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call. It's absolutely free. I promise not to sell you, and I want to serve you to help you figure out what's next for you. Just go to genehammett.com, schedule your call. When you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.